This segment is brought to you in part by the Canadian Historical Arms Society, owners of the Genesee Range, the premier recreational sport and training facility in Western Canada. See us online at historical-arms.com.
The Quiet Professional, a podcast about law enforcement, security, justice, and politics. We are digging deeper on the issues and going where the information takes us with access to experts and authorities. Welcome to The Quiet Professional. Hey everyone, welcome back to The Quiet Professional. Today is a part 2 to a prior podcast that I had posted back on March 16th. It was focused on the violence of the protests and riots in Phoenix, Arizona during the summer of 2020 and the events more specifically on October 17th of that year. The prior episode established a factual baseline of events, and now we will talk to the individuals involved, why they believe they were targeted, and how the riot and gang analysis from those events were grounded in evidence, expert review, and existing Arizona appellate practice. So this is a shift from what happened to who was analyzing it and why they were targeted. My first guest is April Sponsel. She is a former prosecutor, now CEO of Legion Lex Institute, a professional education platform dedicated to elevating standards in law enforcement, legal practice, and public understanding of the justice system. And my other guest is Sergeant Doug McBride. Doug is a retired Phoenix police leader who served with distinction. He was known for handling complex investigations and frontline operations, earning a reputation for steady leadership and a strong commitment to officer safety and constitutional policing. So welcome to you both.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
So we're going to kind of start just by catching listeners up. So for listeners of part 1, what should they carry forward into this conversation that we're going to have today?
Yeah, just a quick review. If you haven't seen the first podcast, summer 2020, I was in charge of all of the riot and crowd control for Phoenix, Arizona. I was a sergeant in charge of that. I've been a sergeant for 20 years with the Phoenix Police Department. April was a prosecutor that was assigned to those cases that came from that. We had 172 days approximately of the everyday deployment. Because of the violence in Phoenix, there was a ton of property damage, assault on officers. It was extremely violent, explosives, setting police cars on fire. You name it, we saw it. Flamethrower mounted to the back of a truck, rescuing a security guard from a place that had been set on fire. Various, and again, you can go to the first podcast to get details on that. But out of that, we identified a group of individuals who had been there throughout the entire summer. And that was identified on day 1 when ACAB was being spray painted all over downtown, which is our first indication that a gang or a group of individuals trying to be like a gang, mimicking a gang, existed. And as the summer progressed, we started to identify these people. And ultimately on October 17th, which was our last day of deployment, we arrested 17 of them, all who had claimed to be ACAB. They dressed alike. They had tattoos of ACAB. Their social media was ACAB. Everything about them, they had identified themselves as ACAB. And even in instances of graffiti, they anchored themselves to Antifa by circling the A, which is a clear sign that they are a part of Antifa, or like a subset of Antifa.
Yeah.
So we brought charges forward. We had a grand jury. April ran that. It was clear and concise. We had a true bill indictment from that grand jury. And in February 2021, April had a meeting at the county attorney's office, and she received massive resistance to these charges. We linked that to just a county attorney and a public information officer who said in an email, just because, well, no, she said, everyone, even though everyone agrees with these charges in the Bureau, this is not the right time to bring these charges forward. And that started a landslide of county attorney at the time, Alistair Adele, sending a letter to my chief stating that myself and others on the Phoenix Police Department had possibly done some misdirection and that they needed to look into it. That resulted in April being sent home and completely locked out of the county attorney's office, and them going through her entire caseload. I was sent home in June of 2021 for 32 months, which is the record for Phoenix Police Department. No one has been sent home longer without a policy violation. And they sent my city manager, Ed Zerker, sent this case out for criminal investigation stating that I committed perjury. And I want to indicate too, neither one of us, not April nor I, have ever received discipline on anything. Well, April's never been disciplined. I've only received discipline for car accidents. I've had, I think, 3 minor discipline writtens, whatever they are, for that accidents, basically in a police vehicle.
Yeah, but nothing in this.
Nothing in this realm. And the other thing that's important to note here is neither April nor I have ever had a case turned back from the Court of Appeals. All of our cases that we have prosecuted, that we have moved forward with during our careers, have stuck. Those charges have been, that people have been convicted and they've gone to prison. So I think that's important moving forward, is that there's no, my city manager going into criminal charges was absolutely, I mean, he was told 7 times. He shopped it to 7 different agencies who said, there's no criminal charges here. And then on the other side, April's folks decided that, and even though Ryan Green, he put in his memo that he believed the charges of riot fit this group of people, he testified in her bar hearing and had her disbarred or suspended for 2 years, and completely bent the truth of what actually happened during the summer of 2020.
And if I could make a mention too, and this is just for more for the Canadian listeners. So ACAB up here, usually a slogan, all cops are bastards. And it's, for us, it's usually more associated with outlaw motorcycle gangs, but also some of the protest groups will put it on their signs and different things. But up here, we've never, as far as I know, in Canada, we haven't identified it as a group. But down there, you had a different situation. You kind of explained the elements there of how they ended up meeting the definition of a gang. So just for clarity. And I want to bring up, as you're kind of mentioning some of these points. So when I look at my notes, April, you had approximately 18 years as a prosecutor. Doug, you were almost 30 years law enforcement. You have gang work in there. As you're saying, like, neither of you had a history of discipline from your respective organizations pertaining to anything that around this type of stuff. So how did those backgrounds prepare you to evaluate those events from October 17th?
So yes, my background in the Phoenix Police Department. So I came up through South Phoenix, which is the highest concentration of gang members in the city of Phoenix. I spent 5 years there. I was also a training officer there. And then for 5 years, I worked in the gang unit. And I became a gang expert in black gangs in Phoenix. So identifying that behavior was very easy for me to move forward as the summer progressed and see that it was coordinated behavior that mimicked gang members. And as a sergeant, I was a fugitive apprehension guy for 10 years. And that's all I did was target individuals that were the most violent in the city of Phoenix. And as you know, to apply it to 2020, it was, these guys were violent against us every day, and it was all targeted at the police department. So I started putting in place a system for us to identify and apprehend these people.
In April, for yourself?
Yeah. So whenever I first started at the county attorneys, that was my first job, out of law school. I started moving up the ranks. I The way that the training was at the county attorney's office, it actually was a really good training program at the time. They have gotten way away from that, so they're not training the prosecutors the way that they should be trained. Back then, we were set up for success. Now they're being set up for failure. So from what I've seen and continue to see. So as I moved up through the ranks, I went through our preliminary bureau, and then I was assigned to our juvenile division, where I prosecuted juvenile delinquents, everybody from crimes from shoplifting all the way up to sex crimes to gang crimes. After about a year of being there, I went up to our trial division, and that's where you deal with aggravated assaults, drug cases, weapons cases, things of that nature. And you're given some violent cases, but that's where it's a huge training ground. And that's where you learn to present a case. And then from there, I ended up being assigned to our gang bureau. Most people at the time were assigned to our trial division for about a year. But I decided to stay for about a year and a half because I wanted to go to our gang bureau, because I wanted to go after those types of individuals, because I saw what gangs do to neighborhoods. And one of the questions that you had asked earlier was to kind of identify the difference between ACAB being a slogan in Canada versus ACAB, the way that Doug and I have identified them under Arizona statutes. Now, as you know, and the state of Texas, under the federal structure, ended up just now getting a very successful prosecution against Antifa and their members. But with regards to October 17th, we and identifying ACAB, the reason why they were identified the way that they were, based on my experience and Doug's experience in looking at the statute, and why it's different than maybe just a slogan in Canada, or maybe even a slogan here, is taking a look at what is their goal? Why do these guys meet this statute? So for instance, the Lindo Park Crips, Black criminal street gang in South Phoenix. I did several cases against them, along with, Doug and other gang detectives and everything, even though I didn't work with Doug, but at that time. But the Lindo Park Crips, they got their name from an actual city park in South Phoenix named Lindo Park. Okay, so they took that name of that park and they morphed it into their criminal street gang under the umbrella of the Crips. And so because, and Doug can correct me, from my information that I learned throughout the years, is that the Crips came from Los Angeles and came over here and then built up the Lindo Park Crips. And then there's a whole bunch of different factions. So that's the reason why, when we took a look and we started analyzing these individuals on October 17th, they took that slogan, which was known as "all cops are bastards," and they morphed it into their own identifier. And that is the reason why we didn't name them ACAB. They named themselves ACAB. And in fact, in some of the text communications that were later discovered in July of 2020, they were the ones that were calling themselves ACAB. They were no longer using it just as a slogan. They were using it as an identifier, just like the Lindo Park criminal street gang, who took their name from a city park.
So how would someone that doesn't have the background in either gang prosecutions or gang investigations, how would they evaluate this? Or maybe they miss certain things. So, what does that kind of lend to this whole experience? Like, if they don't have that background that you do?
So, well, you know what? I didn't have the background before, and I had to sit down with the gang detectives. And I had to sit down and I had to immerse myself into the gang culture and learn about it. I was doing all kinds of internet searches. I went to conferences. I went on ride-alongs. I went out to the gang territory because I wanted to see what exactly are these guys. What are these guys talking about? So for an individual, like a member of the community, to actually immerse themselves into it, there's so much information on the internet that people can go and look at. In fact, as I was pulling together some documents on something the other day, I actually put in Chat GPT, Lindo Park Crips. And all of a sudden, it's bringing up all kinds of stuff, the gang graffiti, the location, because it's pulling all of that information. So if somebody wanted to learn about it, I mean, they could use an AI program. They can, go to a Google search or whatever. But whenever I was learning about it, I was actually going out with the detectives because I wanted to immerse myself.
I think too, I mean, just from a basic standpoint, if you understand the statute itself, which is 2 or more individuals committing criminal acts that are coordinated, that are systematically planned, that claim to be part of a group like this, which is what we had. We had people claiming to be part of ACAB. We had 2 or more individuals, and they were committing violent acts. So that's the basic. I mean, that's the most simplistic form of the statute itself in Arizona. And that's what we applied. And it's one of those things that we always say. I mean, just like riot is 2 or more individuals committing violent acts. And they sublet that in Arizona with mere presence is probable cause for you to be arrested. So you could have 2 or more people setting a fire, let's say during a riot, and there's someone standing off to the left after we've said to disperse, and they're subject to arrest as well, as far as Arizona state law is, as it is right now. And that's a class 5 felony.
So, everything you're saying too, from what I gather from it is, and it'd be the same up here, is, neither of you are the highest ranking in your respective agencies at this time. So none of these decisions are made in isolation. These are all done in consultation. April, you're saying you have to go learn about this stuff still, right? Like you're just getting into some aspects of this. So other people are involved in the whole process, other institutions, but somehow the focus kind of turns on the 2 of you at the end of it all. So it's like, where are all these other people? Where are the organizations, the institutions? Because they were involved in everything that kind of all the fallout that came from this. So I guess my question would be like, when did you realize the focus was turning on the 2 of you?
Doug, I think that this will be good for you to bring in the Audra Van Zant email, because I think that really was the catalyst.
So yeah, and Nathan, what's interesting about this email is I didn't really pay attention to it. I was in the middle of all these deployments, and I remember it coming down, but basically the detectives in the Assault Bureau who handle all of our riot and crowd control prosecution and cases, they received, from my understanding, it was a visit from the commander assigned to the mayor, and then an email, which you'll show, that says, stop investigating these cases, from the mayor. And that was in August of 2020, in the middle of our deployments, that email came out. And really, that's the first time we see anything related negatively to any prosecution of the 2020 summer. And then if we move forward from there, and again, I was not spoken to by my chain of command or from anyone in the city of Phoenix. And I believe April was not at that time spoken to about not bringing charges. And we were arresting dozens of people. I mean, I think we ended up arresting 55 different people for felonies during the summer.
Did you ever, though, at any point, even to today, do you ever find out why that first email was sent?
No.
No.
Okay.
And And to piggyback off what Doug said was the detective that received the email, because we were working on a couple of the cases regarding the individuals that were arrested that were related to that email. She called me up and she's like, hey, just to let you know, we're not going to be able to do search warrants on these individuals because we just got this email. And I was actually taken aback. I was like, whoa, hold on here. You're telling me that the city council or the mayor's office is telling the City of Phoenix Police Department what they can and cannot do. And that's against the city charter. They're not supposed to do that, but they did it anyway. And the City of Phoenix Police Department, who I had worked with, I love the officers and everything and stuff like that, but I was absolutely appalled at the time by the higher ups that they would actually say to their detectives, you need to stop doing your investigations, because they're bowing down to the city manager's office and the city council in violation of the charter, which absolutely just flabbergasted me.
So we mentioned that one piece, this email. There was also, I guess, later on, do you want to talk about, there was a letter from the former chief, is Jerry Williams, said that basically the agency found no wrongdoing, supported officers' decisions. You want to discuss this email a little bit?
Somewhere after, I would believe it was early 2021, the county attorney at the time, Alistair Adele, sent a letter to my chief claiming that several people, including myself, had possibly done some wrongdoing, reference these charges from the summer of 2020. And my chief assigned, Jerry Williams assigned an assistant chief to, it's actually Steve Martos, because he was over our internal affairs division at that time. She assigned him and said, I want you to look into this and let me know if we did anything wrong. And I was able to receive 3 of the 4 pages of a memo being authored by Steve Martos on behalf of Jerry Williams that stated the employees, we've looked into this, and the employees involved in these cases did nothing wrong. There's no policy violation. There's nothing wrong on the Phoenix police side of things. And basically, thank you for your inquiry, but we didn't do anything wrong. And you have the edited version. Basically, it looks like it's in a correction state where it's been sent to Jerry. She's corrected some punctuation and basically some grammar, and it was about to be finalized by that assistant chief on her behalf.
One thing I did want to ask too is, like, so once you start to kind of realize the focus is turning on to the two of you, did you have any discussions with family, friends at that time, or even coworkers? Like, is anybody kind of starting to see what's being put out there, and you're going, maybe it's kind of my ass on the line here, or do you just keep kind of forging ahead?
So, no, I think we were all blindsided, to tell you the truth, Nathan. We were all blindsided, because from the moment that the charges were filed for October 17th, from the moment that those charges were filed, I had the support of the leadership over at the county attorney's office. And despite the fact that Ryan Green did not like the charges, he never once said, hey, you know what, I think we need to dismiss these charges. We need to dismiss the indictments or anything like that until Dave Biscabene's report started coming out. But even then, there was nothing that was giving us an indication or giving me an indication and my superiors that anything was going to land backwards for any of us, because other county attorneys in the past have stood up behind their prosecutors and have specifically stated, this case there's been an indictment. This case is going to move through the process, move through the system the way that it is, and we are no longer further going to comment. And if that would have been done, then the news would have done what they have done in other cases. And there was a high profile case regarding another prosecutor where the then county attorney, Bill Montgomery, who's now an Arizona Supreme Court justice, did that just thing. Came out and said, we're done talking about this prosecutor. We've already dealt with this prosecutor. This prosecutor is going to remain with the county attorney's office. Let's move on. And guess what they did? They took him at what he said and they moved on. But unfortunately, what a lot of people do not know, unless you go and search it, is that the county attorney at the time was suffering from a traumatic brain injury, alcohol and drug dependency, when these decisions were made in February to turn around, January, February, to turn around and dismiss the charges. And just in the county attorney's office, just completely folded. So I personally was completely blindsided.
And same here. I watched as April, they sent her home and took her badge and all that stuff. And I remember being on the phone with her like, yeah, no one's saying anything here. Everything seems fine. And then in June, so, 4 months after April gets sent home, I get called into my, actually not even my chief didn't have the guts to, my chief didn't have the guts to do it. Nor did the executive assistant chief. They gave it to an assistant chief who would later be demoted. And he sent me home for my administrative leave.
So the documents we were talking about too, those will be available on your website, like so the public can see these?
Yeah. And I think you can weave and you can weave them into your podcast. You should have those as well.
Do you want to say real quick the name of the website for people so that they can check out a lot of this stuff? And there is more documentation on there as well.
It's politicallycharged.com, and everything that we say is backed up with factual documents that we've obtained from the city of Phoenix. We have video, we have body cam footage, and we have extensive documentation, memos, internal memos, that document everything that we say is backed up by actual fact.
Well, and as you're describing it, like what's happening on the ground and then what your consultations are, what's taking place with your consultations does not seem to be matching what is being said behind the scenes, like especially once that first email comes out from the city manager. It's like once you learn that later that email came out, when you look back on it now, I'm guessing you're thinking, okay, there was something kind of afoot before even October. They were starting to change their minds and kind of waffle on some ideas.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So I look back on it and I've actually talked to the assistant chiefs, and a lot of these people, they're my colleagues. I grew up with them on the department, and they all say that Jerry Williams was on board to do the right thing. She had the memo. Steve Martos was authoring the memo, and we were moving forward as a police department. And then she had a meeting with Ed Zerker at some point in January, February-ish, somewhere in there. And that flipped the entire script. What I've been told by assistant chiefs is she had a meeting at City Hall. She came back and said, Doug McBride needs to be fired by Friday, transfer everybody out of the downtown operations units, and begin this investigation internally. And Doug McBride committed perjury, and another sergeant, James Grote, illegally incarcerated somebody. And it started this whole landslide of negative events. And we had already, just so everyone's clear, at this point in 2021, the internal investigation into all the use of forces and all the arrests had already been done by the city of Phoenix. I had already been interviewed, and so had everybody else, and everything was unfounded. So they were just waiting for this criminal, investigation to be taken care of, which was a complete farce.
Just to clarify this for me, because I believe that this is the case. In her deposition during the civil civil case that's still ongoing, by the way. In her deposition, Jerry Williams specifically stated that the reason why she ended up doing that is because she was threatened by Ed Zerker that she would be fired if she did not do so. Is that correct?
Yes. And she also, in that same deposition, said that she now, as she sat in her deposition years later, believes that this group did meet the statutory requirements to be listed as a gang.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is on politicallycharged.com as one of the transcripts that you can access and read.
And we'll put it up in the episode description. I recommend people go check it out. It's all right there for them to look at. I want to move just to the some of the actual violence and stuff that was taking place at the ground level. So I guess there was online comments saying that some of this stuff, the violence and the destruction, was exaggerated or completely fictional. And I have some pictures I'll put in the video and we can put up later. But what do people misunderstand about what the officers were facing there at ground level? And then I guess, why do you think people want to minimize or deny what actually happened on that day?
It's funny that you say that, because the violence was even, and since this podcast has come out, I've learned even more stuff that I was unaware of. Not only were the front doors of 620, our headquarters, breached, but the third floor windows were also concussed and broken with explosive devices as well. So, and really what's really interesting to me is that, and this is something that's inherent and systemic in policing, is that people that aren't there and actually participating as a police officer want to have an opinion about what happened that night. And in this particular instance, this is an assistant chief who said to my union rep that the windows of 620 and our headquarters were not blown out, is I believe what I said in the first podcast. And he was out there. He was my commander at the time. And I really want to put out there to fellow police officers, if you weren't there, you don't have an idea of what was going on. I was absolutely there every single day. And I saw the violence every single day. And I experienced the violence every single day. These people were targeting police on a daily basis. And we have the proof. Again, politicallycharged.com, pictures, video, body cam video of not just me, everybody that was out there. We have it all. And if you weren't there, keep your opinions to yourself, because I'm telling you right now, the violence in Phoenix was absolutely real. We had dozens of police cars we had to repair every night, tires, windows, guys' vests that were set on fire, their gear was set on fire. Every single night it happened. And we were having a hard time keeping up with it because it lasted for 6 months.
Well, and I guess we kind of answered a bit earlier about why people were maybe minimizing or denying some of the stuff from the police side of things. But what about the media or even just citizens in general? I don't know if you were looking on like forums or any of the news articles and seeing comments, but is it all just politics at this point?
I think it is, Nate. I think part of this problem is that people want to weaponize the system to say this never happened. And it's interesting because even if you go on the website, on the World Web right now and try to find reports about 2020 and the violence in Phoenix, it's very difficult to find any video footage. It's like it's been taken down. It's very interesting to me because I think a lot of it has to do with politics. And I think one thing that people have to understand is if we don't start to come together, this is not going to work out. I mean, we need, as an organization, a union, as a Phoenix Police Department, as a state of Arizona, as the United States of America, both sides need to work together. This name calling and finger pointing is never going to work down here. We need to come together and work together. And that's that's what happens. When I first got on the police department, that's how it was. Everyone worked together, and we were very successful. We were one of the best police departments in the country in 1995.
Yeah. And April, from a charging perspective, does the level of violence change any of the decisions for you? Or does it affect any of the charges?
It can change. It can affect the charges based on the level of felony that is going to be charged. But as the violence, continues to escalate and grow and everything, at first, like I stated in the first podcast, at first I didn't really understand the severity of the violence that was happening. One, because I wasn't out there. And I was only reading, what the officers had time to put in reports because, again, like Doug has said, they're being deployed every night in the heat, getting IV drips and everything and stuff so they could stay up against all of these individuals that are creating all of this violence. It really did not resonate with me until later. But from a charging standpoint, we would always take into consideration the level of violence being used and the type of damage that was being perpetrated against the officers.
So this kind of segues nicely into talking about the grand jury process, something that we want to get into. So maybe this would be more for April, but can you explain the grand jury process and what they do or do not decide, maybe dispel some of the misconceptions, and then from that, we'll then get into some of the allegations against the two of you.
Yeah, absolutely. So pretty much basically the grand jury process in the state of Arizona is it's pretty simple. It's the standard is probable cause. And so pretty much basically what that looks like is it's a panel of citizens that is chosen, and they usually sit for, I believe it's 3 months straight for their duration that they're assigned to the grand jury. And they come in, I think, anywhere between 3 to 4 different times during the week. And they hear all different types of cases. And it's all different types of citizens. In fact, there's a couple times that, I would go to a grand jury, do a couple presentations, and there was a defense attorney sitting there. And so, I mean, it's all different types of individuals that are chosen to make a determination. And so you have the grand jurors themselves and the other individuals that are in the room. And it is a secret proceeding. And the other individuals that are in the room are the prosecutor, the court reporter, and the officers that are going to be testifying. And so pretty much basically the purpose of the grand jury is you go in there and you kind of give like an 80,000 foot view of the case. And then you step out, and then the grand jury deliberates, and they call you back in, and then they either give you a true bill, meaning they've indicted the individual or individuals, or they say, no, we're not going to indict anybody. So in this particular case, it wasn't just an 80,000 foot view. We wanted to make sure that we shored up as much information for this grand jury that we possibly could. And again, the standard of proof is very low. It's probable cause. But what we did in this case is that not only did I have Sergeant McBride testify, but I also had one of the other officers who was the actual scribe that night, who was writing everything down, who knew pretty much basically every step of what was going on. He testified first, just to the pretty much basically blanket facts. And then I brought in Doug, and he testified to more information as well as the gang charges based on his training and experience. And one thing that I want to point out is that the way that the grand jury was presented the information, the only thing that was different in this grand jury compared to all the other gang grand jury presentations that I have done, the only thing that was different was we showed the grand jurors the compilation video that is on the website. And I believe you're going to also put it into the podcast for people to watch. But that was the only thing that was different. And keep in mind, I had been prosecuting gang members since 2007 is whenever I went to the gang bureau. not only had I been prosecuting them, but I had been teaching at international conferences, the Arizona Gang Investigators Conference. I taught prosecutors at different prosecuting agencies around the state. So the presentation that was given was the exact same type of presentation that I was never told was incorrect until this case.
And this is the PowerPoint part of it?
I didn't use a PowerPoint in the grand jury, but the format that I would use, that I used in this case, is the same exact format that I've used in the past. And that's pretty much basically talking about what is a criminal street gang? How do they meet the definition? And why are these guys considered, criminal street gang members? And if they're not documented gang members, how are they assisting? Because in the state of Arizona, thanks to one of my trial cases that was upheld by the Court of Appeals and is a published opinion, the prosecutors do not have to prove that a person is a documented member of a criminal street gang, only that they were assisting a criminal street gang.
And maybe if I could jump in there, just like for me, looking from the outside, if you only have to prove it to this very low threshold, but it almost sounds like you're going above and beyond. You're actually already proving it to a higher standard. So what would necessarily be wrong about that? Like, why would they be upset with this or say it's wrong? Like, what does it matter? You gave more detail than you had to. It just sounds like you did more work than you needed
exactly
to.
And we did. The reason why they were angry is because of two things. One, because we compared this group to the Hells Angels, and to other known established criminal street gangs. And that's exactly what I have done in other trial cases in front of a jury, where I've done a compare and contrast. So the individual, the civilian that has never lived in this world, that really actually doesn't want to believe that this world even exists. They want to go to their nice little houses in their nice little communities and not know that there's communities under siege in the city of Phoenix and other places by criminal street gangs. They don't want to believe that that's true. And so you have to be able to explain that to them. And so doing the compare and the contrast, that's how you do it. And so they were angry because I compared these individuals to the Hells Angels and the Bloods and the Crips.
So is it like saying that you're essentially kind of coloring their opinion, or you're leading them to some opinion of it? Is that their argument then?
You know what? To tell you the truth, I have no idea. Because
I feel like you still have to explain the definition for the regular citizen. They don't know what they're looking at. So it just seems like, you would have to explain this to some degree.
Right. And that's exactly why we have a gang expert, because the statute is very specific. When I did trials, I would break the statute down. Like, what's the difference between a formal and informal association? And that is one of the things that you have here. When you break it down to the normal civilian and everything, they start to get it. They start to understand. And that's what we were doing in the grand jury. And that's what I've done. That's what I had done countless times in trials that have been upheld by the Arizona Court of Appeals, including the use of the way that I would describe what a criminal street gang is. I've never been told ever by any, and I would do gang expert training, and I would have individuals like Ryan Green and other prosecutors in there. Nobody ever came up to me and said, you know what, I really don't like that you're comparing this group to another group. So when we went into the grand jury,
seemed normal. Yeah,
it was a normal thing. It wasn't until later that all of a sudden, now all these things on the wall that I have here, with regards to every gang case that I've gotten accommodation for, were presented the exact same way. And you know what? I learned from experienced prosecutors who told me that that's the way that it needs to be done. So I have no idea why all of a sudden now everything that we had been doing for years was completely wrong.
And Nathan, if I may, one of the reasons why we choose Crips, Bloods, and Hells Angels is that they're the most well known to the average person. You can name most people. I mean, the school mom, the school teacher, the walking around businessman, the stay-at-home mom. most people know Crips, Bloods, and Hell's
I
Angels.
say they're the most visible, and we have
Right.
that exact same issue up here too. Yeah, the whole seeing is believing. But when I try to,
Right.
if I try to go and explain foreign interference right over people's head, they're like, "What the hell are you talking about?" There's some people in the shadows somewhere. But yeah, when you have the visibility piece, that is far more easy to compare it to.
And we have a grand jury of people from all different walks of life. So it made sense to correlate these two different, Crips, Bloods, and Hell's Angels. And this group was more violent towards police than either one of these groups because they were targeting us, and Crips, Bloods, and Hell's Angels, they don't want police. They don't want us around. They don't want to target us because they know we're not good for business. So it's a very interesting correlation that we came up with because I think it resonated with the grand jury. They could understand, okay, Crips, Bloods, they don't want contact with police. Hell's Angels definitely don't want contact with police. And this group is actually going out and
looking for that confrontation,
antagonizing confrontation with police. Much different organization.
Okay. So do you, maybe we'll talk about some of the allegations that each of you had against you, because April, maybe I'll say this word wrong because I've never seen this word in my life. You suborned perjury.
Yes.
Is that right? Is that the right word?
Suborned perjury.
You guys in your fancy legal jargon. And then Doug, you were said to have created perjury through expert opinion. So do you want to explain a bit what that means exactly? Where that came from?
I'll start this one. So pretty much basically under Arizona law, an individual suborns perjury or commits perjury if they if they intentionally lie about a fact, basically. Okay. So here is the actual definition for perjury in the state of Arizona. A person commits perjury by making either one, a false sworn statement in regard to a material issue, believing it to be false. And that is what they were looking at with regards to the allegations for me suborning or, asking Doug to commit perjury and then saying that Doug committed perjury. You have to believe that it has to be false. And so I'm pretty sure maybe that's the reason why there were so many different agencies that were like, yeah, there's nothing here. And then of course the Pinal County Attorney's Office 2 separate times turned down the charges against us. But that's what that means is suborning perjury is that you're pretty much basically making a false statement knowing it to be false.
Okay. So obviously you dispute that claim, Doug, and you were you had the expert. I was looking here. So how did you distinguish your expert opinion from factual testimony? Like when we talk about this piece of things,
when we did the grand jury, I thought it went very well, and as we've stated multiple times, April and I did not know each other prior to this entire summer. So when we got, and sometimes that can be tough for when you're first working with an attorney and you haven't worked together before, but I felt like it flowed really well. And watching the grand jurors while we were doing it went really well. But this whole perjury thing arises out of speculation, again, by people that are not there. We had a Judge Ryan Toohill who made her opinion that it was what we did was egregious, I believe is what she said in her report. We had a Ballard Spar report, which is incomplete per our city manager, Ed Zerker, under deposition that he rushed it and it was incomplete that they were going on, which said, I shouldn't have said the things I've said or the comparisons that I made in grand jury. And I look back on my transcripts and over again, those are my opinions, and we were just trying to make a correlation for people to understand. And what's amazing is the very first point of contact with with criminal investigations in Phoenix is you have to go to our special investigations unit, and these are some of the most experienced detectives in the state. Mm-hmm. These people come from homicide and robbery and all kinds of places to do stints in special investigations. And the commander of special investigations told me and my union rep, we don't have a prima facie, which means we don't even have an inkling that a crime has been committed to even bring me in for questioning. Because I showed up there with my union rep and said, I'll be interviewed if you want me to interview. And he said, I don't even have prima facie to interview you. That's how weak this claim
Well,
was.
it sounds like when we're talking about all these things, essentially the public has to understand this stuff through more of a legal lens and not so much the political and the emotional sides that get put out there through media. But I guess that's why, like, you have all these statutes, you have all these elements you have to meet for offenses, you have all this prior training, you have precedent. I mean, it's all these things we're going through to show, these things weren't, again, decisions weren't made in isolation. There's all this stuff that comes before it. There's all these people working together and the institutions, the organizations to make a decision on whether you're proceeding or not. But then again, it all just falls on you too. So everybody else just kind of vanished,
Right.
faded into the black.
Right. And I agree with you, Nathan, 100% is that a lot of people believe that, the law is black and white when it's not. There's so much gray in it. And we wanted to make sure that that Doug and I were correct in our analysis, that what we had provided to our senior leadership teams is that, our bureau chiefs and the command staff over at Phoenix PD, that we were right. So in order to make sure that we crossed all of our T's and dotted our I's, I went to my bureau chief and I asked for an outside expert to be hired. And so that was approved. And the expert was Clint Davis, who was highly, highly revered with regards to his gang experience, because I don't even know how many years, Doug can say how many years Clint had on as a gang expert, but he was not only hired for the October 17th, but he was hired on other gang cases in the Maricopa County Attorney's Office, as well as across the state. But what was interesting is that when we went to the meeting prior to the charges being dismissed, and it was COVID time, so I didn't have Doug or any of the officers go to this meeting where we presented the elements of the case, because Clint Davis went, and he's the independent expert. And when I was sitting there and I was explaining everything to why the charges were supported by the evidence and everything, they didn't want to hear from Clint. I even said, here, we've got the expert here. We've got our third party expert and everything and stuff like that. He can talk about why this group meets the definition in his training and experience and everything. They didn't want to hear. They had.
So, and he agreed with you that it met the definition?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely, he did. And to tell you the truth, if either Doug or Clint would have said to me, you know what, I think you're really stretching it here. I don't think that the charges are supported by the evidence. I don't think we should charge criminal street gang. I would have said, you know what, let's go ahead and scratch those charges.
Even bringing in the outside, like you have a third party that's coming in saying it meets this definition. You have a gang expert who's currently working that's saying the same thing, and obviously you're learning about this and you have your own opinion whether it meets the definition of it, and then you're all coming to the same conclusion from three completely different areas. You think that would just put it over the top and be like, okay, we solidified this, we believe it is, this group is the street gang.
Nathan, here's how ironic this is that Clint, who I was in gangs for 5 years and he was there. We were not on the same squad, but I know who he is and we have a working relationship. He called me after April had him review the case. And he said, Doug, this is the best gang case I have ever read. And I was like, I was shocked. I mean, because I did not expect that from him, because he's a very critical thinker. And the other part that I think needs to be woven in here, April, is not only did April have this idea and this inkling that they were matching the statute, not only did I, but independently of both of us, Lieutenant James Hester, who was the sitting investigations lieutenant over assaults, who handles all of our riot and crowd control cases. He came to the same conclusion independently of both of us. I never spoke to him, but in the meeting he called at 6:20 with all of the 3 levels of chain of commands that were there, and the Maricopa County Attorney's Office, and the FBI, and JTTF, and everybody else that was in the room, James Hester stood up and said, I believe this group meets the criteria of a criminal street gang.
Just as we're kind of coming up to the end of time here, I want to make sure we get these last few pieces in. There was some case law that will kind of work on supporting the things we've been talking about. I imagine this might go to you, April, for these questions, but so there was the State versus Donnell Thompson, and there's also State v. William Miller. Do you want to talk a bit about these, maybe the Donnell Thompson one? So this involved some gang evidence, expert explanation, and structured presentation of gang concepts. It also supports the idea of jurors. They need context to understand gang behavior. And I mean, we spoke to some of this a bit earlier, but I just wanted to make sure we insert some of this case law as well. Do you want to talk a bit about this case?
It's kind of funny because, again, these are 2 cases that I participated in. State v. Donnell Thompson was a double homicide case with a Lindo Park criminal street gang member. And I co-chaired this case with another prosecutor. And I was tasked with questioning the gang expert during the trial. And so it kind of goes back to that whole previous statement that I was talking about, and that is that the same exact information that I presented in the Donnell Thompson case, and the way that I presented it in that case, was upheld by the Arizona Court of Appeals. And that is exactly the same type of presentation that we made for the October 17th. State v. William Miller, another criminal street gang case where they were extorting the victim for drugs and money and threatened to kill him. And again, when we had the expert up on the stand, and the expert in that case was Clint Davis. And again, the way that it was presented to the jury was the exact same way that we presented it in the October 17th. And those 2 cases specifically demonstrate how having a gang expert go through their training and experience and talk about the criminal street gang and how they meet the definition helps aid the jurors in their final determination. And using that comparing and contrasting and examples is, again, why we were so flabbergasted whenever all of this came down to say that what we did in the grand jury was wrong.
So we're just kind of coming up to the end of the time. Just to kind of recap for people. So because I got a bit of a list here. So we talked about your own personal experience, evidence, documents, statutes, expert validation, grand jury process, and as we just kind of finished on here, case law. So, is there anything that you think listeners really need to understand before forming an opinion? I mean, we gave a lot of information here, and if I was to give a point, I would say, read beyond the headlines. Don't just take things at face value. But is there anything that each of you maybe wants to just touch on and say, if you really wanted listeners to understand something, also go to the website. But, what in particular stands out for you that they should be paying attention to?
I think, Nathan, the biggest thing I'm finding, and especially having moved states, I moved from Arizona to Maryland, is that the media streams you see are very, very diluted and very opinionated based on who the reporter is and what direction they want to go in. Dave Biscobing wanted me to do an interview with him and wanted me to sit down with him. And I told him, absolutely not. I said, you have one opinion. You're not going to say what the truth is.
Is this from the ABC one?
ABC
And that
15,
was just recent.
yes.
That request was just a couple weeks ago, correct, Doug?
Yes. A couple weeks ago. And I said, and I spoke to my wife and I said, you know what? He's not going to tell the truth and he's going to slant whatever I say. And case in point, when I got this discipline post retirement, and I had sent an email out to the city explaining actually what had happened and what Ed Zerker had done, spending over $10 million and with no results. He said, basically in his report, he said, Doug McBride complained about mistreatment. And that was it. So I think the biggest thing people need to understand is that your national media, your state media, what they're putting out there is not necessarily what's happening. And that's why we're doing these things, because very few people know what actually happened in Phoenix during the summer of 2020. And a lot of my friends who have watched the podcast who live in Phoenix, they've let me know they had no idea. Oh my God, I can't believe how much stuff happened in the summer of 2020. That's how it was kept under wraps for us.
And family and friends too, I imagine. Imagine they, come and say, hey, I saw this on the news. They might have some questions about it.
Yeah, I just yesterday, I had another guy who just finished the podcast because as cops are, they procrastinate and wait and eventually they get to it. But yeah, he was actually a bomb tech during the summer of 2020. And he said that was unbelievable. He had no idea. Again, if you're not in the fire, it's hard to know what the heat and what the temperature was.
Yeah.
And that's why, and that's why the podcast has been, and Nathan, I want to thank you for doing this because it's been awesome to get the word out there, and the success of the first podcast was amazing. So thanks for doing a sequel.
Yeah, you bet.
Yeah, and I would agree. I echo what Doug said. We appreciate this this opportunity because you know what, the truth does need to get out there, and people do need to read beyond the headlines, and they do need to question. And in fact, on the website politicallycharged.com, you can actually go on there, and there is a little bubble with like the memo or the text, I don't know what it's called, but people can click on that and they can send us a message. If they have a question, we're an open book. And if we can answer it, we're going to be able to, we're going to answer it. We have nothing to hide. And in fact, I am putting the rest of my career completely on the line with regards to wanting to get the truth out there, because I'm not going to, because by the mere fact that I am not atoning for my sins, I will never be able to be reinstated back to the State Bar of Arizona or any state bar in the United States, because I will not come out and say that I did anything wrong, because I didn't. So that's number one. And number two is that I'm not going to put my integrity on the line to be part of an organization or a profession that would rather lie about an individual than stand behind them and put out the truth, because there's a little bit of chatter in the news. So with that being said, we're an open book, and there's going to be more to come. A lot more to come. And so I want everybody to know that, hey, you got a question, whatever, send it to the website or leave it in the comments on your YouTube channel, because that's how we found some of the comments. And that's why we wanted to say, hey, you know what? No, this happened, and this is why we're answering it based on a couple comments.
Yeah, you bet. And you know what? On that, I'll say even in the YouTube comments, so I'm sure there was a couple bots in there, but the language is really weird. But, if people ask questions respectfully and they actually are genuinely interested in finding out what happened, we'll get them in touch and you can answer those. We're just at the end of the time. So I want to say thanks for providing deeper context on all this stuff and kind of walking people through the depths of these issues. And it is important. It's critically important that people start taking the time and listen to these long form discussions. Start looking into this stuff. If you really want an opinion, kind of like both of you have been saying, if you weren't there, it's hard to know truly what went on and what continues to happen after the fact. So, thank you for having the courage to come do this. And we'll definitely have an update in the future from the both of you. So thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Yeah. Thank you, Nathan.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for listening in and following along with the discussions. Be sure to click the follow or subscribe button on your respective listening platform. Also, check out the Quiet Professional on X and Instagram under TQP780. And most importantly, please share where you can. Everyone has a part to play in getting these education and information pieces out there, so pass it along. Thanks again.